Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our study of the Screwtape Letters. Been having some good discussion on these so far. If you're new, as always, I'm just going to go ahead and remind you, if you're joining us live, feel free to go ahead and leave comments as we read through these when you have thoughts or questions. If you're watching this on YouTube afterwards, go ahead and leave comments below. Let me know. Love to have, discussion. That's the whole point of these, and to delve maybe just a little bit deeper than is first readily apparent. So, as I mentioned before, I have a physical copy of the book here. Oh, and I just left smudges all over it. Well, that's mine, so that's fine. So we're going to go ahead and I'll try to remember to scroll down for you. I usually manage to do it. So, kicking off in letter 5. My dear Wormwood, it is a... Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention. Keep in mind, as we go through these, this is all written from the point of view of a demon to his nephew, so things are flipped, topsy-turvy, sorry. Just important to keep that in mind. I usually mention it, but in case you don't know. My dear Wormwood, it is a little disappointing to expect a detailed report on your work and to receive instead such a vague rhapsody as your last letter. You say you are delirious with joy because the European humans have started another war of theirs. Keep in mind, Lewis, of course, was a veteran of war, and it was something that apparently, understandably, was very traumatic to both him and Tolkien. And so that's something that obviously infected a lot of his writing. Infected is the bad word, but obviously it influenced a lot of his writing because war is something that does affect people so strongly. So it made its way into this book as well. Because the European humans have started another one of their wars. I see very well what has happened to you. You are not delirious, you are only drunk. Reading between the lines of your very unbalanced account of the patient's sleepless nights, I can reconstruct your state of mind fairly accurately. For the first time in your career, you have tasted that wine which is the reward of all our labors, the anguish and bewilderment of a human soul. So basically saying that demons' goals in life, such as they have them, is to cause humans distress and anguish because that pulls us farther away from God. It has gone to your head. I can hardly blame you. I do not expect old heads on young shoulders. Did the patient respond to some of your... sorry. Oh, excuse me. Did the patient respond to some of your terror? Pictures of the future? Did you work in some self-pitying glances at the happy past? Some fine thrills in the pit of his stomach were there. You played your violin pretty, did you? So this is really him just kind of beating down at Wormwood and really making the point that demons, especially because they do pursue things with such short insight, they do go after that immediate distraction and that distress, and they're very good at that. But the more destructive piece of what they do is to play the long game, if we want to say that. And so here, Screwtape is berating his nephew for focusing on the short term. Well, it's all very natural. But do remember, Wormwood, that duty comes before pleasure. If any present self-indulgence on your part leads to the ultimate loss of the prey, you will be left eternally thirsting for that drought of which you are now so happily enjoying your first sip. So yeah, basically just going down saying, hey, you need to make sure that you are, after all, pursuing your patient for the long term. And that's something you have to realize demons do. Yes, they take joy in the short term, but they also aren't just there for that. They are ultimately trying to destroy you and pull you away. And so that's what is going to really be their long-term goal. They're not after just the short term. They take pleasure in that because they are demonic and they are literally just ripping you apart at the seams. But the long term is what is going to cause you far more distress and damage. If, on the other hand, by steady and cool-headed application, here and now you can finally secure his soul, he will then be yours forever, a brim living chalice of despair and horror and astonishment, which you can raise to your lips as often as you please. Now, that's something that's actually really important to take note of. It's very easy to get lost in despair and anguish, and to let that become your home. And obviously, demons encourage that because that does essentially nourish, if we want to use that word, them over and over. You become their spring, which they can drink from, if you want to use Lewis's terminology here a little bit. That doesn't mean you're eternally lost there, but once you're deeper in that, it becomes so much harder to dig your way out of. Many of us have experienced that, where you've just been deeper and deeper in the woods, and through pure stubbornness, you seem to convince yourself that heading deeper in will somehow lead to an oasis. So that's really just kind of what he's urging Wormwood to do here, is just to leave the patient in a constant state of despair and loss by looking at the long-term effects. So do not allow any temporary excitement to distract you from the real business of undermining faith and preventing the formation of virtues. Give me, without fail, in your next letter, a full account of the patient's reaction to the war, so that we can consider whether you are likely to do some good by making him into an extreme patriot or an ardent pacifist. There are all sorts of possibilities. In the meantime, I warn you not to hope too much from a war. And it's interesting to note there that even as a veteran himself, Lewis doesn't give credence to either hardcore patriotism or pacifism. And the Bible actually warns about that to a degree as well, warning people not to get too lost in the wars of man, not to get too wrapped up in it. And that's not to say, obviously, you can't be concerned when things are happening. You should be aware of what's happening. But essentially, man and demon play such convoluted games that you can never have a fully clear picture of what's going on. So if you think something is right or you think something is wrong, I'm not belittling you in that. Absolutely, I think you should support your country, provided you're not stuck there against your will. But if you do support your country, I think it's absolutely okay to be a patriot. But don't confuse that with replacing your spiritualism, your loyalty, always, whether you're a patriot or a pacifist, which doesn't necessarily say those two are different, but your loyalty always has to be to God first. And because the world does interfere with us so much, it's very easy to make those issues the head of your thought, and then love takes a back seat, because what you're actually focused on, instead of the true enemy, is the enemy, quote unquote, across the other side. Now, that's not to say that there aren't dark things that go on in our world. I mean, we're facing that right now with certain people's reactions to Charlie Kirk's murder. Obviously, that's something that's very distressing. Whether you're Christian or not, if you have a heart, that's something that's very distressing. But even as distressing as it is, and as anguishing as it is, and it is, you can't let that overtake the focus on the fact that we are fighting a spiritual battle above all else. Of course, a war is entertaining. The immediate fear and suffering of the humans is a legitimate and pleasing refreshment to our myriads of toiling workers. But what permanent good does it do us unless we make use of it for bringing souls to our Father below? Of course, mind you, since this is demons, they're speaking of Satan. When I see the temporal suffering of humans who finally escape us, I feel as if I have been allowed to taste the first course of a rich banquet, and then denied the rest. It is worse than to have not tasted it at all. The enemy, meaning God, true to his barbarous methods of warfare, allows us to see the short misery of his favorites, only to tantalize and torment us, to mock us with incessant hunger, which during this present phase of the great conflict. So, mind you, and I spoke about this a little bit when we went through some of the previous letters. Demons don't have the full picture of things. They've lost true sight and understanding of who God is and of what is ultimately going to happen. They might know what's in Scripture, but they don't actually see it. If they have understanding of it, it is purely from the academic, purely from the earthly, because the earthly is Satan's domain. They don't actually have any spiritual understanding of it at all, and thus they are basically blind, especially when we go into the matter of this spiritual warfare, which is constantly being fought around us. His blockade is admittedly imposing. Let us, therefore, think rather how to use, rather than to enjoy this European war. For it has certain tendencies inherent in it which are, in themselves, by no means in our favor. Which is kind of interesting, because you would think that war would so easily fall into the realm of demons. But as Lewis is going to go on to point out here, I believe, part of the silver lining of distress and anguish and panic is that it does lead people towards God. I'm not saying that that's necessarily something that's all positive, because it is still a horrible situation. But the fact that the response is people saying, I need the Lord, because clearly things here are not enough, that is the blessing. That's the silver lining we have to take in that situation. We may hope for a good deal of cruelty and unchastity, but if we are not careful, we will see thousands turning in this tribulation to the enemy, while tens of thousands, who do not go so far as that, will nevertheless have their attention diverted from themselves to values and causes which they believe to be higher than the self. Now that's something to also keep in mind, because demons have nothing beyond the self. And focusing on the self is something that they take great advantage of. Because when you're self-focused, it's literally the opposite of a godly love. You are embodying their traits in that case. Now, that's not to say necessarily that just because you're having a thought about yourself, it's a demonic thought, but to prioritize the self. And again, I'm not saying, if you're sick, don't pray for your health. I'm not saying that if you're having struggles in a financial situation, you can't pray and try to find a solution. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the selfish prioritizing of the self will absolutely just drag you away and will give demons endless pleasure, because that puts you in their camp. I know that the enemy disapproves of many of these causes, meaning God. So that's, again, even causes which people think to be beyond themselves, God can disapprove of, depending on what it is. There are causes that are truly good and noble. The Bible even talks about the only religion, quote unquote, that God respects is to take care of widows and orphans. So that's not to say that religion is bad, but you can't make religion into spirituality. Your religion has to come from your spirituality. But point being, but that is where he is so unfair. He often makes prizes of humans who have given their lives for causes he thinks bad on the monstrously I know what this word is, I just don't know how to pronounce it. Sophistical? Basically, a sophisticated ground. Ground that the humans taught them good when they were followers, the best they knew. This is something he kind of expands on at the ends of the Chronicles of Narnia, or in the last book of it, I should say. And it's something that's also repeated in the Bible. They talk about how many churches will proclaim, Lord, did we not do these works in your names? Did we not cast out demons in your names? We did this all in your name. And the problem is that even though these are what the world will look at and call good works, the reality is they don't actually know God. And so they're not good works, because they're stemming You know, even from, if you want to think of it as a good endeavor, it's something that is in the very, very, very best short-sighted. And usually the reality is it's a very selfish desire that's motivating it. But even if you were uncommonly altruistic in your mindset before salvation, the reality is that your efforts then are incredibly short-sighted and oftentimes are going to end up causing harm. Which isn't to say you shouldn't try to help people, but you shouldn't be so naive as to think your own brilliance is going to bring that about. You know, I mean, look at your own life. You know, it never went perfectly because you were trying to plan everything. Consider, too, what undesirable deaths occur in the wartime. Men are killed in places where they knew they might be killed, and to which they go. If they are at all of the enemy's party, if they are at all of the enemy's party prepared. So basically saying that because they know they're marching into a situation where they might be killed, they might be serious about getting right with God. That is what happens a lot of times. If you ever had somebody in your family who is sick, or just known somebody who feels like they're going to die, it is remarkable how suddenly serious about God they get. Which I'm not knocking. You know, I think that's good that they have that moment, if they haven't had it up until then. But war is much the same way. People who go into war often understand they can be killed, and oftentimes will then more seriously consider God. It's I'm not going to say it's a universal thing, but there are many, many, many stories of platoons where if somebody in that platoon is a Christian, genuine, honest Christian, the squad does not go out before that man prays. It is something that is understood. You know, the movie Hacksaw Ridge actually captures it, and that is one of the more fantastical examples in history. But there are several stories that I've read where, you know, they would talk about the platoon would refuse to go out before the man was done praying. Not saying they refuse orders, but you know, if they know they have a patrol they have to take care of, the man prays before they go out. If they know they have to, you know, go on a mission during prep time, they make sure that he prays. And that's just something that happens because death is so evidently staring you in the face. And that is one of the things that will most often make people who up until then wouldn't consider God. How much better for us if all humans died in costly nursing homes amid doctors who lie, nurses who lie, friends who lie, as we have trained them, promising life to the dying, encouraging the belief that sickness excuses every indulgence, and even, if our workers know their job, withholding all suggestions of a priest, lest it should betray the sick man to his true condition. Now that's something, obviously, it depends a lot on exactly what a person's situation is. There are people who you know, are at the end of their life and use that as an excuse to just become completely self-indulgent. I'm not saying I don't get where that's coming from, but obviously that's kind of the example that Lewis is using here. It all comes down to the person's, the state of their soul and the state of their mindset. And how disastrous for us, in this continual remembrance of death which war enforces. And how disastrous for us is the continual remembrance of death which war enforces. One of our best weapons, contented worldliness. I would like just triple underline that if you can, as far as one of the demon's best weapons. Contented worldness. A content person does not think they need anything, and so they do not seek God. I said that and immediately lost my place. Contented worldness is rendered useless. In wartime, not even a human can believe that he is going to live forever. I know that Scabtree and others, mind you, Scabtree is just a demon that's also working on their own patient, and others have seen in wars a great opportunity for attacks on faith. But I think that view was exaggerated. The enemy's human partisans have all been plainly told by him that suffering is an essential part of what he calls redemption. Again, that's something that's just straight up true. The Bible talks about that over and over, that you will go through trials and you will go through suffering. That's one of the reasons why Christians, if we're of the right mindset, can even look forward to that in a sense, because we know it means we're in the correct, direction, on the correct path. So that a faith which is destroyed by a war or pestilence cannot really have been worth the trouble of destroying. I am speaking now of a diffused suffering over a long period, such as the war will produce. Of course, at the precise moment of terror, bereavement, or physical pain, you may catch your man when he reasons temporarily, or when his reasons temporarily suspended. But even then, if he applies to the enemy's headquarters, I have found that the post is nearly always defended. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Basically saying that when somebody is put in a moment of great distress, and oftentimes it can be physical, but really any moment of great distress, there's kind of a moment when everything is balanced on the head of a pin. And that's when you can find out that even if they proclaimed to be following the Lord, it may not actually be in their hearts. But if they are of his flock and they genuinely pursue him, then then the demons cannot rip them away at that point. They are sealed and signed in God, and God does not allow the enemy to rip them away. All right. Letter 6. My dear Wormwood, I am delighted to hear that your patient's age and profession make it possible, but by no means certain, that he will be called up for military service. We want him to be in the maximum uncertainty, so that his mind will be filled with contradictory pictures of the future, every one of which arouses hope and fear. There is nothing like the suspense and anxiety for barricading a human's mind against the enemy. He wants men to be concerned with what they do. Our business is to keep them from thinking about what will happen to them. Now, mind you, that's kind of what we got to talking about before. Doing something is actionable, right? That is an outward action. When you act, when you do something, when you go out and pursue something, that is an actionable intent, and it's usually something that is focused on others, and is oftentimes, if it's focused through the Bible, it's something that is godly. Inactive intent is something that is destructive by its nature. Inaction means you're sliding back. Your patient will, of course, have picked up the notion that he must submit with patience to the enemy's will, again, meaning God. What the enemy means by this is primarily that he should accept with patience the tribulation which has already been dealt out to him. The present anxiety and suspense. It is about this that he is to say, "Thy will be done." For the daily task of bearing this, the daily bread will be provided. And that's also something that is just so important to understand. We are not to try to prepare with the assumption that we're still going to be in the same place doing the same thing in a month or even a week. We're to ask providence for the day. That's not necessarily saying you should go to bed every day with $0 in your bank account. I'm not saying that. But don't try to, cause destruction to yourself and your soul by prepping for something which you cannot prep for. It is your business to see that the patient never thinks of the present fear as his appointed cross, but only of things he is afraid of. Let him regard them as his crosses. Let him forget that since they are incompatible, they cannot all happen to him. And let him try to practice fortitude and patience to them all in advance. For real resignation, at the same moment, to a dozen different and hypothetical fates is almost impossible. And the enemy does not greatly assist those who are trying to attain it. Resignation to present and actual suffering. Even where the suffer oh sorry. Even where that suffering consists of fear is far easier and is usually helped by this direct action. Basically saying that whenever you focus on the future, kind of as I was just talking about, you go into so many hypotheticals. And you may even latch onto one of them as the thing you really want, or the thing you're desperately trying to avoid. But the problem with it is that in doing so, you're going to neglect the moment, right? You're looking forward to a future that you can't control, at least not in the broadest senses. So don't, neglect everything that's going on in your current to try to pursue or avoid a piece of the future, because you don't know what's going to bring that about. And if you're panicking about several different things, it's impossible for all of them to come true, but you don't think about that. You think, oh, well, this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen. It's like, okay, deep breath. God is going to provide you for the day. Beyond that, let go of it. Don't stress. That's one of those things that is easier said than done. I understand that. But that is the effort. That is the goal in that. An important spiritual law is here involved. I have explained that you can weaken his prayers by diverting his attention from the enemy himself to his own states of mind about the enemy. We talked about that a few letters ago when we were talking about God essentially being made into inanimate objects or idols. On the other hand, fear becomes easier to master when the patient's mind is diverted from the thing feared to the fear itself. Because now you're no longer praying that God protects you. You're just praying about a panic, about a feeling. Considered as a present and undesirable state of his own mind. And when he regards the fear as his appointed cross, he will inevitably think of it as a state of mind. One can therefore formulate the general rule. In all activities of the mind which favor our cause, encourage the patient to be unself-conscious and to concentrate on the object. But in all activities favorable to the enemy, bend his mind back on itself. Let an insult or a woman's body fix his attention outward, that he does not reflect, I am now entering into the state called anger, or the state called lust. And that's ultimately what it all comes down to. It comes down to distraction. It's either distraction from God or distraction from your own struggles and worldly nature, if we want to call it that. The moment you become aware that you're facing or even entering a certain state, you need to practice how to then attack it. But if the enemy can keep you from realizing that, that's part of why the Bible talks about making sure to pray for the unknown things. If the enemy can keep you from realizing you're entering those states, they will absolutely destroy you with it, because you're so wrapped up or distracted that you're no longer thinking clearly. Sorry, we'll make sure. Da-da-da-da-da. I'll leave you guys behind there. That is a heck of a word. Man, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. I left the tab for define open this time. Okay, so basically saying in contrast to something that has just been stated or mentioned. Okay. So basically saying, conversely, let the reflection, my feelings are now growing more devout or more charitable. So fix his attention inward, that he no longer looks beyond himself to see our enemy or his own neighbors. Again, because now you're becoming wrapped up in the self. As regards As regards his more general attitude towards the war, you must not rely too much on those feelings of hatred, which the humans are so fond of discussing in Christian or in anti Christian periodicals. In his anguish, the patient can, of course, be encouraged to revenge himself by some vindictive feelings towards the German leaders. Mind you, this was talking during the point of the World War. And that is good so far as it goes, because revenge and hatred towards beings of any kind is a tool of the enemy, which is different from self-righteous anger. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the personal, selfish anger, the worldly anger. But it is usually a sort of melodramatic, or if I could turn the page, come on. And I totally lost. Usually a sort of melodramatic or mythical hatred, directed against imaginary scapegoats. He has never met these people in real life. They are lay figures modeled on what he gets from the newspapers. The result of such a fanciful hatred are often more disappointing. And of all the humans, the English, in this respect, are more deployable milksops. They are creatures of that miserable sort, who loudly proclaim that torture is too good for their enemies, and then give tea and cigarettes to the first wounded German pilot who turns up at their back door. So basically, Lewis is tackling the whole idea of propaganda. And this is something that still stands true for our military today. We do not humanize the enemy, and there is a reason for that. You know, you're supposed to shoot them. You're not supposed to let them actually be people. And so that's kind of just what he's tackling here. The idea that whenever we do bear hatred for the enemy, it's often towards that ambivalent force. Now, that's still not saying that hatred is okay. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Still not saying that's okay to harbor and to have it grow in your heart. But it's also important to understand that oftentimes, especially in man's wars, the enemy is a human. Do what you will. There is going to be some benevolence, as well some malice, in your patient's soul. The great thing is to direct the malice to his immediate neighbors, whom he meets every day, and to trust his benevolence out there to the remote circumference, to people he does not know. The malice thus becomes a wholly real, and the benevolent largely imaginary. Again, we talked about that earlier. Whenever you're applying real life, quote unquote, feelings over your spiritual connection, that becomes what you're seeing things primarily, and it diminishes your view of the kingdom of heaven. There is no good at all in inflaming his hatred of the Germans, if at the same time a pernicious habit of charity is growing up between him and his mother, his employer, and the man he meets at the train. Think of your man as a series of concordant circles, his will being the innermost, his intellect coming next, and finally his fantasy. You can hardly hope at once to exclude from all these circles everything that smells of the enemy. But you must keep on shoveling all the virtues outward until they are finally located in the circle of fantasy, and all the desirable qualities inward towards the will. It is only in so far as they reach the will and are there embodied in habits that the virtues are really fatal to us. I don't, of course, mean what the patient's mistakes for his will, the conscience, fume and fret of revelation and clenched teeth, but the real center, what the enemy calls the heart, or the soul, or the spirit, whatever name you want to give it. All sorts of virtues painted into fantasy, or approved by the intellect, or even by some measure loved and admired, will not keep a man from our Father's house. Indeed, they may make him more amusing when he gets there. So basically, Lewis is tackling the idea of virtues, and you can't let your virtues become this ambivalent general feeling, because that, again, goes into inactionable moments. If you just generally wish goodwill on the people who are downtrodden, but you do nothing whenever you meet them on the street. You have an inactionable faith. James talks about that a lot. How faith without deeds has no value. And so that's really just what Lewis is hitting on here. Don't let your values, your virtues, the things that are good, the things that are godly, become so lost out in the void that they are no longer actionable. But that's what needs to be written on your heart. But that is where we'll go ahead and close things out for today. I hope you guys got something out of it. Hope there was some, interest, some joy that could be granted from it. Hopefully a little bit of insight. But I love you guys as always, and I'll see you next time.